I think as a girl with ADHD, it turns up like, a lot of talking in class, but then they're like, oh, it's just girls talk a lot, but not always and not as much. And usually they can stop when they're told, stop. So it's been interesting, like seeing the community and how many women there actually are who struggle with this sort of thing.
ADHD Rewired, episode
310.
This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups, and you can learn all about our intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. You can do all of this at our website, ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. I'm really excited for today's guest because today's guest is actually sitting next to me in the ADHD Rewired studios, not on Zoom. It's nice to be able to see someone who's not like 2 inches big because that's the size of the screen. And it's Miraj Gain. Miraj, welcome to Glenview.
Thanks.
So Miraj is a psychologist. I'm going off a non-bio. So psychology, clinical psychology.
PhD student.
Yep. She's brilliant because she's now in her 8th year of her PhD.
Yeah.
And she is studying some really cool stuff that we're going to talk about related to attention and executive control and decision making. And is a member of one of our coaching groups. What season was it?
17.1.
17.1. All right.
Woo-hoo.
So let's dive right in. So where were you in school? Give us just a little bit more of that info.
Yeah. So I go to school at Virginia Tech, but I'm not there currently. So I finished my coursework. I did a lot of clinical work when I was there, just training wise. And then now I'm doing my dissertation research as a fellow at the National Institute of Mental Health.
It sounds very fancy and professional.
It does, right? Words are cool.
And all right, so let's first dive in a little bit to your story, and then I want to dive into your research because I think it's really fascinating.
Cool.
Because if you're anything like me and you get overwhelmed just making like small decisions sometimes, like her research is looking at that in some really neat ways. So you were almost diagnosed in high school.
Yep, almost.
But
I forgot to turn in the paperwork, so I was not diagnosed.
And so then you went to college. Mm-hmm. How was college for you?
College was all right. I took on a lot, I think, and I was a double major, psychology and English writing. It was helpful to be in a liberal arts school. I'll say that because the class sizes were small. It was a lot more personal. Your interactions were way more personal. So people sort of had eye out for you, and you maximize that ADHD like socialness sometimes. But yeah, I definitely took on a lot. Like my junior year, I did like 26 credit hours.
What?
It was not a good idea.
That's an entire year for, oh my gosh.
In a semester. I was trying, I don't know why I had gotten it in my head. Like, I want to graduate in 2.5 years. It was just, yeah, I don't know. It was part of that like overestimation, under delivering. So
when you were in high school, you were in like AP classes and.
Yeah. I had some AP classes, some normal classes. I sort of, it was good because AP classes were stimulating. And I think that's like the big thing that I always needed. It was like I needed the challenge to sort of get through school.
And so intelligence got you to so far.
Yeah.
Right. And then you were in grad school.
Yep. Yeah. So I actually applied for PhD program straight out of undergrad. But I had no idea what I was doing. Like, this was the first time I'd ever done something like this. And I didn't have a whole lot of research experience. I had some, but I didn't have a lot, and I had no idea how the process worked at all. So I didn't get into any PhD programs first round. I took a year off, did some more research, got married, traveled a bit, lived overseas for 6 months, did more research there. And then
where'd you live?
I actually lived in Iran for 6 months.
And that's where your family is.
Yeah, so my family's from there. So I was sort of visiting family for a while. It was like a year after college, trying to distract myself and study for the GRE and stuff. So I did that, and it was actually a really nice experience because I got to do research in a completely different setting, with, it was like cross-cultural research, looking at memory of the self and how that differs between sort of collectivist versus individualistic cultures. So it was cool. It was a really cool experience. I'm glad I did it. And then I applied for PhD programs again. And this time I also applied for master's programs. Didn't get into any PhD programs again. Happens. But I did get into a really great master's program at San Diego State University. And it's just like a regular psychology. It wasn't like clinical or anything. But I learned a lot in terms of neuroscience and just stats and research, and being in a larger university setting was really helpful. And then the third time I applied to PhD programs, I got in. I got into everywhere I interviewed. So
was that hard for you to keep applying?
For sure. It was hard, but I think there's this aspect of like, stubbornness that sort of comes with, who I am, that it's like, if I want something, I'm going to get it. It's going to be hard. It's going to take longer, all of that. But I think I've come to sort of accept that that's okay as long as I still get it.
Would you say that you've always had a kind of resilient spirit?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's hard work is part of, having things be challenging, and being able to look, like, problem solve and look for different ways to sort of tackle things is like, it's kind of fun. So, while it is hard and it really sucks in the moment, it's good to pick myself back up and try again.
So how far along were you in your master's program in grad school when you saw the diagnosis?
It wasn't even in my master's program. It was in my PhD program. Okay, and it was probably in my third year in my PhD program.
And what was going on then?
It was just a lot of stuff. I think, you're responsible for treating patients. You're responsible for writing progress notes, which
were
the worst. Yeah. But,
give me a crisis any day. Make me write the report about it. It's so hard.
It's so hard. But I think having the diagnosis allowed me to try to think about what it was that I was doing that was also making it even harder, like being a perfectionist about it. Like, do I really need to include every single detail of a conversation we had in a progress note? Probably not. Like, the gist of it would be totally fine for liability reasons.
You did those like process notes.
Right. It's like, I don't have to be like, I said this and then she said this. And, and I think realizing that, looking at my own notes and like looking at somebody who didn't have ADHD, who was like in my class, I'm like, oh, that's all I need to do. Like, so, it was helpful and eye-opening in that way. And of course, figuring out how I could set up my environment so that I'd perform better, more efficiently. I ended up finding a closet in my lab space because our graduate students, most of us shared, there was like a shared lab space, and people talked all the time.
That's hard.
And that's part of grad school. Like, you need to vent about everything that's going on, and you need to, talk about research stuff. And But yeah, I found a closet that had no outlets, that I needed to basically like put an extension cord through the hallways and silence please sign on the door.
In the closet.
In the closet, yep. But it worked. You know, it was a small space. And
wait, was it a big closet?
No, it was a small closet. And the reason it was a small closet, because there's this concept of like effective field of view that they talk about in visual neuroscience sometimes, or attention research. And it's basically like, you know, we have our field of view is like what you can see given where you are. But effective field of view is like sort of how much like attention space, like how much you're aware of, you know. And I think the smaller the space I was in, the less space felt like existed in my brain. So that worked for me.
I always say, you know, when it comes to reducing distractions in our environment, it's simple math. Just decrease the number of things that you could see.
Right. Yeah. Decrease the number of things you see, and like the walls sort of help. You know, it's like it confines my brain space.
Okay, there's like those science fair like trifold
boards. Yep. Like a cubicle, basically.
Yeah, it's, you know, when we were sitting at the other spot of my office, and I was pointing out the number of squirrels that just like grab my attention outside my window. Yep. That it's like a bad meme, right? That it's but yeah, it's like my brain can't filter that.
Yep. But especially it's moving.
Yeah. Yes. It's anything that's moving. It is amazing what can distract me.
Yeah, totally. I agree. You also mentioned children that sometimes pop up outside your window.
So I have a corner office, and I have four windows, and my desk is like an L, and so one of the windows is very close to like where I'm sitting at my desk, and apparently right outside my window is this really good hide and seek spot for kids, because there's like a playground kind of near where I'm at. And I was telling Mirage that when that happens, they don't even realize like they're right outside somebody's window, and I'll just kind of like peek my head really close to the window with like a smile, and she's just like, that's so creepy.
Totally. Like some like big grin out. It's like Cheshire Cat, you know, staring at you outside the window.
Because I'm just more of like an eager anticipation of like, I know they're going to be startled, and it's sort of like I'm sort of playing the game that they didn't know that I was included in. But like, hey, you're in my space now. We are now playing. And then if I creep them out, then they don't come back. Then I can get back to work.
You're like a myth in the community, probably. It's like the smiling man.
It's like guy that does that ADHD thing. It's a weirdo. All right, so you were diagnosed. Like, were you really struggling at that point?
I was. I think I was getting a lot of feedback about, you know, Mirage is really good at a lot of things, and she has a lot of potential. And, but there, you know, as soon as she fixes, like, sort of improves her development in one area, like another area sort of falls a little bit off the wagon a little bit. And I was like, why is this so hard? Like, it's just not as hard for everyone else. So, and I was just tired of hearing that whole, like, you have so much potential, but not quite, you know, and that was like my parent teacher conference feedback since birth.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's amazing. And I look back at my old school reports, it's all in there. Like it's, you know, smart, but doesn't really apply himself, is easily distracted, is messy, is disorganized, forgets to turn in his homework. It's like, it's, why it wasn't, you know, because I wasn't hyperactive. So for me, it wasn't, you know, I wasn't caught.
Well, and I think as a girl with ADHD, it turns up like, you know, a lot of talking in class, but then they're like, oh, it's just girls talk a lot,
right,
you know?
Right.
But not always and not as much. And usually they can stop when they're told, you know, stop. So I think it's tough. And it's been interesting, like seeing the community and how many women there actually are who struggle with this sort of thing.
So let me ask you, you told me that you're first generation in the U.S., your family's from Iran. Mm-hmm. Is there, we know that in a lot of minority communities, there's a lot of stigma around all things related to mental health.
Totally. I think the cultural stuff comes in a good bit. I think it also is a place of how family expectations and values can shape sort of our perceptions of ourselves. And so if, I don't know, so say you're in a culture where it's valued that women behave a certain way or that, you attain a certain level of achievement. I know we dealt with this a lot in our group, in our art group, like the high expectations for achievement, you build those skills, but if you fall slightly short, it becomes a hard thing to deal with. Like you start thinking like, oh, well, now this is going to reflect on my family's reputation. This is going to, it becomes like a more collectivist issue rather than just a you thing. And so you start feeling responsible for like lots of things.
So, did you tell your parents right away when you were diagnosed?
Oh yeah. So my mom, I think, always sort of knew, and she's the one who had pushed for it in high school also, which was really helpful. I think my dad didn't quite have as much. It's just stuff that it's not even cultural. I think generationally, that my parents' generation weren't really aware of these sorts of things. And if they were, may have approached life differently. Now they're totally open and talk about it all the time. And my mom thinks, sometimes she has it, whatever, but, or like, yeah. So, but I value it. I think it gives me uniqueness. It gives, the people in my family, like my parents, aspects of them that are just unique. My dad was really sports oriented. And so there are valuable things that came out of it. It did bring us closer, I think, in some ways, eventually. Once you sort of have an answer, you can say, oh, this makes sense why it was so hard for her.
And so they were really accepting and...
Yeah, and I know that not everyone is that privileged. But it's an ongoing dialogue still, You
have siblings?
I do. Yeah, I have two. I have a brother who's 6 years younger than me and a sister who's 8 years younger than me.
So the oldest.
Yeah.
So you were the practice kid.
Yes. Yes, but yeah. Yeah, and that's the other thing is like being immigrants. So I was born here, but my parents were immigrants, and that's also a level of parenting difficulty that gets added on. You don't have your parents to help you raise children. Like there are no grandparents sort of in the picture. You end up going towards communities out of sort of like lack of options. You hang out with people who are around you because that's who you're comfortable with, and there's a lot of mistrust, towards people who may not be like you and things. And I think it takes time for that to get over sometimes. And so I was the firstborn, but also in like a very sensitive time period, I think. So it's important. I think that those sorts of the stigma and things can come from more than just even within the U.S. I know I worked, like being in Virginia Tech, I worked with a lot of people in the Appalachian region and families who are Southern, from Southern communities. And that was really eye-opening to me, just to experience the difference in culture.
What was it about it that was eye-opening?
Well, I think, so I had, the okayness of talking about feelings, for example, like how culturally acceptable it is to even say like emotional things, gender stereotypes, like how males are supposed to be rough and tough. And of course, this isn't the case broadly across every person in these communities, but tends to be like the primary perspective. So how do you approach that? How do you encourage someone to be vulnerable when vulnerability is not okay?
And how do you?
with great difficulty. No, I think it's just meeting people where they're at is probably the best advice that I have. Is because you can't force someone who says like, I don't think psychological things are real, or I don't think emotions should be talked about, or this is just silly stuff.
So that's stuff that you have to deal with.
Yeah. And you sort of have to say like, okay, so let's talk about this from a medical perspective. Let's talk about this from a neuroscientific perspective. And that's one reason I really like having both sides. Like I have the psychological training, but I also have this neuroscience background that helps me be able to explain how something that looks like it's just.
So you were looking for more certainty in your data, which is what your research is actually kind of about.
Yeah. I research how we make decisions under uncertainty, and not just uncertainty about like what's going to happen. So that's one part of it. So uncertainty about outcomes, but also uncertainty about what we see and what we perceive. So how do we know what to attend to, what something is, and how do we decide, what the outcomes of those actions or choices are going to be, and then combine those to like figure out what to choose or what to do.
Well, what we're going to do is we are going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to dive into your research because it's fascinating.
Thanks.
All right, we will be right back. One of the most rewarding things for me as a coach is getting to witness people finding the courage to do the things that they were too afraid to do for so many years. Members who join ADHD Rewired's coaching and accountability groups learn more than time awareness and planning skills. They discover what really matters, and sometimes what really matters is not on your to-do list. I want you to meet Phil. He joined our coaching groups in the fall of 2019. He's an artist who has been working as an architect for the last 10 years, feeling stuck and afraid because of his ADHD.
Before this group, I really didn't think that I had a way out of the 9-to-5 job that I do. And I actually realized that for so many years, I've done a job that was safe because I just couldn't risk taking risks, because my ADHD was just too unknown. I just couldn't take a risk. And now I have actually started to take risks, and I've spoken in a way that put my voice forward. And God damn it, I had a meeting on Thursday, and it was with 7 very angry union men. I asked to come to the meeting, and I'd been pushed out because they didn't want the architect in the room advising or stuffing it up. And by the end of that meeting, those 5 guys were all crowded around me asking about the design, and one of them stood up and said, "This is what we've wanted the entire 3 months of this negotiation, to be able to talk to someone." And 3 weeks before, I had my manager, my director in the room. I've been asking for help to get in that room. This process, you need to help me. You're not doing enough. You really have to help me do this. And that was because of this group that I spoke up. And then the director of that area sent an email going, "That was just a great meeting. We came together. Thank you." It was like, circulate that to all my directors and show them. I honestly can't believe it. That session for me was 40 minutes in a year of pain and 10 years of pain in this job. No one in the room could actually give them what they wanted. It was fighting and arguing, and they were terrified. Everyone was terrified of these union guys. And I'm not saying I'm magical or anything, but it's because I spoke up and I got into that room, and I still want to leave this job. But it's like a knowing has happened that's always been there, but I haven't been able to get it out because I was so frightened. That's just like some huge great moment that happened this week. It's like, it was so cool. It was magical. I still want out of the job, but Jesus, it's so much better day to day.
With ADHD Rewired's intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups, you're going to have the support and accountability to take the skills and insights you learn and actually take action on them. You're already trying hard. Maybe it's time to try something different. Go to coachingrewired.com and sign up to get invited to our final registration event for ADHD Rewired's 20th season of coaching and accountability groups. Spring sessions begin April 8th. We are already filling up. To see how many spots are still available in each section, and to see session dates, times, and other details, go to coachingrewired.com. Start your journey with our 10-week intensive coaching group. You can keep your growth going with weekly sessions with our members of our alumni program, which you will get to try for free when you join our coaching and accountability groups. This is more than ADHD coaching. This is ADHD Rewired Coaching. Come experience the true power of supportive accountability for members of your own tribe. Join us for our last registration event. It's on March 5th. Registration is by invitation only. To get your invitation, go to coachingrewired.com and click on the big green button. Space is limited for our registration events. Don't wait because we will fill up. The website again is coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com. All right, we are back. So, Marsha, where do you want to start with your research? Because I know that you just presented recently a paper. What was your topic? It's super nerdy and cool sounding.
Yeah. I presented a poster at Society for Neuroscience, which is a gigantic and very overwhelming, but also super fun conference. So my topic was on how we make decisions under perceptual and reward uncertainty. So uncertainty about how much something, what the value of something might be, or uncertainty about what something is. So I just presented on that. That's just like from pilot data from my dissertation. So moving along on that large project.
How many people did you have in your study?
I had this. So this was just behavioral data. I had about 10 subjects in this one. And now I'm collecting data in the MRI with functional imaging with the same task. And
what are you looking for?
Several things. So one is how are people actually doing this? What do they trade off? Do they combine perceptual reward information that they have? Do they primarily bias their choices using one or the other? And also, are there sort of individual differences in how we use perceptual and reward information, how we integrate
Let's break that down. So perceptual reward
information.
All right. So perceptual, the information we're receiving from our environment.
Yep. Like what we see, what we know about our environment. Yep.
Okay. And then reward.
And then the reward information is sort of what we know about the outcomes of our actions or of the stimuli in our environment. So, let's say you're approaching someone and you're not quite sure, are they angry or are they just focused, right? Well, whether they're angry or focused is going to alter how they react towards you if you, in fact, interrupt them. And so you have to decide, am I going to assume this person's focused?
Well, I could be focused and then get interrupted and now I'm going to be angry.
Now you're going to be, yeah, totally. So also like your prior knowledge about what that person is like, are they going to be reactive or are they just going to be calm and, whatever. So that's kind of the question is.
So you're kind of looking at reward as a knowable outcome.
As a knowable outcome, yeah. So I don't have any learning in my task. People don't have to figure out what the options are worth. I sort of tell them up front, like if you pick option A, you have 80% chance of getting a high reward.
So set up the scenario for us.
Okay. So the scenario is there's sort of 4 pictures on the screen, like in quadrants. And you're told that 2 of the pictures are always cars and cars are worth nothing. And they're always difficult to see. Okay. They're hard to see. They're sort of meant to be distractors.
Okay.
Okay. And then you have a face and a house. And faces and houses are commonly used in neuroscience tasks, partly because we have a pretty good idea of what regions of the brain they should activate.
Got it.
And so it's sort of a sanity check when you're trying to be like, is my task actually doing what it's supposed to be doing? So faces and houses are targets and they're worth something. How much they're worth depends on the condition you're in. So sometimes faces are worth, anytime you choose a face, it'll give you 8 cents. That's 100% of the time. It'll give you 8 cents. And that's a high reward amount. low reward amount is 2 cents. And so when face is highly rewarding, house is not very rewarding.
So what is the participant choosing? Like, what's the...
So they're just picking a stimuli out of in these 4 quadrants. Like? Yeah, whatever they feel like will give them the most reward. So the caveat here is that the clarity of the face and house change as you move through the trials and in one of the tasks. So they're not both clear and easy to see, right?
So the cars are worth nothing, and then you're just, what do you think will give you the most reward?
Based on what you know.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So you're told the probability of reward for picking each one, and you're told that they might change in clarity. So now the question is, are you going to choose the one that's clearest because you're guaranteed to get whatever outcomes associated with that? Or are you going to try to find the one that's really, that you know is more rewarding, and risk potentially choosing a car in the case when that stimulus is harder to see?
So these are all either blurry, they're blurry to some degree. And you're kind of thinking, I think that's a car, I think that's a house.
Right. Okay. You sort of have to and it's really fast. You only have 1.5 seconds.
Nice.
To do this.
Okay.
Yeah. So it sounds complicated, but usually when participants do the practice, they get it within 10 trials. Once it's mostly adjusting to the time. But it just goes to show how fast we do actually make choices. Super fast. You only see the stimulus, guys, for 0.3 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah. That's enough to perceive it. Yeah.
That's neat.
Yep.
So how does this play out in kind of real world application?
Yeah. So there's a lot of situations this can be applied to. So when we go about our day to day, most of the choices we make are in some condition of uncertainty. Yes, we have experience, but we've sort of developed these expectations, right, about how likely something is going to happen, or, how fast we have to travel to get to certain destination in a particular amount of time, or et cetera. So say we're trying to find a friend in a really crowded, or you're a little kid and you're trying to find your mom in a really crowded shopping center. You have to sort of trade off. Am I going to tap on anyone who looks like my mom, or am I going to wait until I'm sure that this is my mom before I tap on them, or try to find them? And that's sort of where the trade-off is happening. It's like, how much do you want the outcome and you're willing to go through different mistakes to get there? Or do you want it, is accuracy what you're sort of prioritizing? You want to be sure about your choice before you make it.
And are you looking at different temperaments of people, or different? What are some of those variables that you're looking at?
Yeah. So, that's why the question of individual differences comes out. Because you could be very biased by the sensory information in your environment. That's really what guides your behavior. You don't really care about the outcomes as much. Or you could be guided by certainty. And these sort of more general things. So it may not have anything to do with the perception or the outcome. It could just be how uncertainty averse you are. So that's one domain that I'm looking at is aversion to uncertainty. Another individual difference sort of domain is behavioral inhibition excitation. So how sort of impulsive and impulsivity seeking are you, or sort of reward seeking are you, and how inhibited are you? And reward sensitivity is another one that I'm looking at.
So I would imagine the outcomes of, we were breaking out in with an ADHD population or an anxiety population, you're going to see a much different data set.
Well, and even within ADHD populations and anxiety populations, and just taking into account the fact that there's so many comorbidities, right, across these disorders that, or conditions, that it's important to look at. I sort of take a very dimensional approach to psychopathology. I don't really look at it in terms of diagnostic groupings. Okay. But I focus
more of the process. Functional impairments.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what process are you not motivated? Do you not find things rewarding? Are you really scared of punishment? Like those sorts of things, you know, sort of fear averse, punishment averse, and that's sort of like a process rather than, or like executive control and things.
So if you can then identify your own personal individual difference in that realm, are you then able to like suggest or say like what are the types of environments that would be best to make decisions in?
Yeah, so we can figure out through math and computational models.
I know how much you love math, and
I do. I do love math. I actually do very much love math. It hasn't been my strength, i.e. I was an English major. So I sort of stayed a little bit away from that, but I kind of regret it now. Like I learned so much in grad school, both in terms of like computer science and math, that I'm like, wow, if only I knew that you could use these things for like real stuff, I might have been way more motivated.
Well, it's like when I was in my undergrad and took stats, like it just didn't make sense to me at all. Like it was so painful. And in grad school, when I took research methods, which is applied stats, I thought it was fascinating. And it was like, why? I need to start with why. Like, don't show me with what. Like it gives me no context to put it anywhere.
Totally.
Give me the why, and I'm you got my attention.
Yeah. So the goal is, so you can figure out how, a decision would optimally be made, right? And then you can try to see, okay, what if I manipulate this parameter that somebody has difficulty, they don't weight the perceptual information enough, for example. What can I do to manipulate this parameter and make them weight perceptual information more, so that they're like attending more to their environment, or attending to the correct thing in their environment, etc. And that's sort of very simplistic, but so you can see, are there aspects of treatment that modify this parameter a little bit and allow someone to make a choice that's closer to optimal in terms of the situation and the outcomes they want to get. Decisions, unfortunately, are very context dependent. Right. So what works in one situation may not always work in every situation. And
based on the way you're looking at this and your research, is it more looking at that like day-to-day decision making, or is there also application for the bigger decisions, the types of things that if you can't overthink, we tend to?
Yeah. I think the research has a little ways to go before it really can be applied to like a specific decision scenario.
Okay.
Because there's so many variables that we have to consider that research doesn't have. Even it's a lot of variables to manipulate at the same time. So it's hard to then know what is actually changing.
So many participants to be able to get anything that's significant.
Yeah, and meaningful. So we keep it simple, but we hope that that we can start sort of getting at these day-to-day decisions, or how we can potentially how these things relate to like your affect and your mood, and how we can manipulate these simple processes through treatments like cognitive behavioral therapy or acceptance commitment therapy, or neurofeedback and things like that are a little bit more experimental at this stage. Can we manipulate how a person behaves in this decision context, and how does that then translate to how they behave in their day-to-day life? Does that generalize? Does it not generalize? Right. So there's so many open questions still. But I would love for this to have sort of applications in like precision medicine, trying to figure out like what works for you, given what you want to achieve, or what the outcomes that you want to get. But I think we definitely have a ways to go, for sure.
Have there been things that I always think it's interesting when researchers find unexpected results that are sort of contrary to what their hypotheses were.
Right.
Unfortunately, they tend to not publish those, so we never really know.
Oh yeah, totally.
And it's a whole other issue.
Yeah, that's why open science is so important. Just like put it out there, put your hypotheses out there, put your data out there.
The data that you didn't want is just as important as the data you wanted.
Totally. I definitely agree with that.
So, but any surprises?
Not so far. I think my biggest surprises are always in myself. Like, wow, Mirage, you really had to make this super complicated, didn't you?
You mean you tend to overcomplicate these things?
No, not at all. Yeah, but it's, I think that those are the biggest surprises so far. I'm interested to get into the neuroimaging data to see if there are any surprises on that end.
You said when because it took you a couple of years to kind of really nail down this topic and put words to these ideas that were in your head.
Yeah.
You started looking at individuals with autism and attention networks.
Yeah. So in my master's program, I was interested in how social communication symptoms in autism related to difficulties in attention processes. So these are like your alerting arousal systems. You know, some individuals with autism are thought to be hyper aroused, some hypo aroused or less aroused. And then there's executive control, you know, error monitoring, that sort of thing. And then, orienting. So actually like engaging your attention in something, disengaging your attention from something and switching it to something else. So transitioning for sure. Yeah. So I was interested in how atypicalities in these processes related to sociocommunicative symptoms, and how functional connectivity in these networks related to behavior. And it sort of dawned on me. I was like, okay, well, there's several reasons why someone might not be socially motivated. Like one could be because you just don't value social things. Like you can see a person's emotion, but you're like, meh, don't care about that. Like the spinning wheel is so much more interesting, you know? But you could also avoid social situations because you have difficulty attending or perceiving them, either because something's moving too fast and you can't keep track of it, or because there's so much, like you mentioned, like looking at a face, maybe it's like too arousing and the sensory stimulation. Yeah. And you sort of have to disengage. But at that point, the issue is slightly different, right? So now you're looking at someone who values social interaction, but because they have difficulty with it and because it's not a reliable like reinforcer, you end up ignoring the social information or can't quite make sense of it enough to do what you need to do in that social
executive function. Right.
Exactly. I mean, social executive functioning and just perceiving social information. Like if our emotions change so frequently on our face, we don't really think about that as something that's hard to see, but sometimes it's hard to keep track of things that move quickly, and change often. So that's where then my dissertation idea came from, because I realized a lot of disorders, you see difficulties with attention and perception, but also difficulties in sort of motivation and learning, like reinforcement learning and things. So, I sort of combined these ideas. Turns out it was a lot harder than I expected.
I find as a general pattern or theme for people with ADHD, we are good integrators. We tend to, pull information together from seemingly unrelated things, which is great and also can be painful sometimes when you're doing it, especially in an academic setting. Yeah. So many times I sat in front of, a professor and I was like trying to explain my idea and I'm like, they're not getting it. Like, can't find the words for it. But there's so many things now that can help with this sort of thing. Like, how do you put your science into lay terms? How do you I did to sort of practice this kind of concept. I did like a 3-minute talk competition, explain your whole research idea in 3 minutes. That was super difficult. Such little time 3 minutes is, but it was fun. It was good exercise. Just iterate over and over. And I wrote it out sort of as a paragraph. Then I started to sort of talk about it normally. I recorded myself
doing it to be like, does this sound natural? You know, you start thinking like, what is essential for the understanding and what is like me rambling off in like the corners of my brain. Although the brain's round, so I don't really know if we have corners, but you know, roundish. Anyway, see, like that. So, yeah, what's the essential information? What can I cut and won't lose the essence of the topic? And so, yeah, iteration.
What's the hardest thing for you about managing your ADHD going through your PhD program?
The hardest thing, several things. I think one is the stigma in academia around talking about this sort of stuff. I think, strangely enough, especially in psychology and neuroscience, not everyone has this stigma, but definitely it exists. And I think it's tough to not be able to openly talk about that.
Because we were talking before we hit record if whether or not you wanted to use your real name because you're like looking for internships and work. And so decision making, how did you come to that decision to use your real name?
I think it came down to values for me, and it came down to what is important and where I want to see the field go. Ultimately, yes, I could overthink it and I could think, oh my God, this person's going to think this way and this person. But I feel like I'd be most comfortable in a place that is open and understanding and willing to listen if I'm self-advocating and, you know, and not perceive sort of talking about these things as, oh, it's an excuse. Because it isn't. It's never an excuse if you're putting in effort and if you're looking for solutions, right? It becomes an excuse if you stop looking for solutions. So that's the kind of place I want to be in.
Well, I want to thank you for doing that because it's, I think that every guest that comes on this podcast and 98% of the guests on this podcast use their real name. I think I've had maybe 2 people who wanted to use an alias name. That's fine. I just think everyone that does that, it's a radical act of stigma busting behavior. And thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no problem.
Because there's risks involved in it.
There is. But I think, and not everyone can. And I totally respect that. Going back to meeting people where they're at, you know, but I'm proud of having gotten as far as I have.
As you should be.
With everything.
You know, you were saying, but it's, I'm in my 8th year of my program. I'm like, you're getting your PhD. You have ADHD. Like, you're rocking it.
Thanks.
I mean, they don't just hand out PhDs.
No, and it's not. And I recognize all the privilege that I've had along the way, you know, to get there. Because it costs money to do stuff like this, to send in a lot of applications, to do all these things. So I think as a field, we need to be way more aware of that and way more supportive of the people who don't have those privileges. Whether it's because of neurodiversity that the privileges are sort of undermined or whether it's because of financial, social, cultural things. Yeah, for sure.
So we're getting near the end. I wanted to take one more quick break. When we come back, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your experience in the coaching groups.
Of course.
All right. We will be right back. Did you know that you can support this podcast each month and get some cool perks in exchange? By going to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. If you are listening to this and it's early enough on Tuesday, February 25th, and it's before 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, you can join me for an hour of group coaching with other patrons who give $25 a month or more. We had months where just 1 or 2 people have come. So as far as value goes, it doesn't get much better than that. I want to thank all of our patrons who give any amount, and especially those who give at a $25 a month level or more. I hope to get to see you today. MJ, Justin, Rob K, Tina, Joshua E, Miley, Will Curb, Agnes, Nikki, Matthew, Christy M, and Steph ADHD. We do this every fourth Tuesday of the month at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. Your support fully covers the cost for my production and editing team over at Pro Podcast Solutions and helps offset some of the cost for my executive assistant, Barb. Whether you can give a buck or 5, 10, 25, 150 or more, I am grateful for every patron who gives what they can. And if you're not in a place to give, you can support this podcast in a non-monetary way. Share it with someone you know or leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Also, if you're brand new to the podcast, first I want to welcome you. And I also want to invite you to first listen to a handful of episodes before you determine how much value you're getting from them. Anyways, thank you to all our current, past, and future patrons. Oh, and I noticed a larger than normal number of credit cards were declined this month. So if you would be so kind to check to see if you need to update your billing information, I would greatly appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you. Thank you. To become a patron, go to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And thanks. So if you're anything like me, you're probably highly skilled at ignoring those reminders you set for yourself. Yes, even I do that sometimes too. Don't you just wish that there would be a short podcast episode like the ones that Will Curb does at Hacking Your ADHD that would focus on how to create more effective reminders? Wait, what's that? That's what Monday's episode was all about? You mean this week on Hacking Your ADHD, Will Curb covers how to create more effective reminders? Now, how will I remember to listen to that? Check out Hacking Your ADHD this week and every Monday. Join Will as he explores ways that you can work with your ADHD brain to do more of the things that you want to do. Each episode is between 13 to 18 minutes long. And every Friday, check out ADHD Essentials with Brendan Mahan. It's a lot like ADHD Rewired, without the swears, with a focus on kid-related issues. Both Hacking Your ADHD and ADHD Essentials are both part of the ADHD Rewired podcast network, available to everyone, everywhere you consume podcasts. Go subscribe. And don't forget, you can join me and the host of Hacking Your ADHD, Will Curb, and the host of ADHD Essentials, Brendan Mahan, every second Tuesday of the month at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern for an hour of live Q&A. Register for free at ADHDrewired.com/events. That's ADHDrewired.com/events. And we'll see you there. All right, we are back. And before we dive into you talking about the coaching group, I just want to give you kudos for your attention shifting abilities or attention switching abilities. So during the last break, you've got an email because you've been waiting for responses for internship placements. So while we're on break from this conversation, you responded and to one of the internships that you applied for. Mm-hmm. And just now you got it confirmed.
Yep.
And then added it to your calendar.
Yep.
And you're back.
Yep. We're back.
I'm impressed.
Thanks.
And we came up
so much practice.
And we came up and you said something that we should write this down because it was really catchy and clever. And you wrote it down. What was it?
Not ideal, but I can deal. Yeah.
I like it.
Thanks.
I like it.
Thank you. The date was not my top choice date, but it was a date that I could work around.
Not ideal, but I could deal. I love it. I love it.
Thanks.
All right. So in the maybe one day merch store that will happen. That's maybe at some point.
Stay tuned.
Maybe we'll have that on a shirt.
Future Eric will be planning.
And what was the other one you said?
Research is me search.
Research is me search. I love it. Love it. All right. So research is me search. You did some of your own me search, joining our coaching groups not that long ago.
Yeah. So I was super privileged to have my work over, was really just open to, do whatever career training and self training you need to be successful in whatever career you choose. So I was really blessed for that. Like, thank you. Work.
Did your work pay for the group?
Yeah, my work did pay for it, but it was part of sort of like career self-development type thing. And I had to go through some advocacy, but they're really supportive of neurodiversity out there. So it's good. It's really awesome. Great. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So the self-help aspect was really group help. It was a lot of people talking about their experiences, very relatable experiences that I think not all of us were ready to talk about ourselves. But when we heard someone else talk about it, just all of a sudden come out and you're like, oh, what are your strategies for dealing with that? How do you deal with this? And how do we implement like the skills that we know we should be using? Like, I think a lot of us have the awareness, like, I should be planning.
Well, that's something we were talking about before we recorded it, is like sometimes it can be almost a little bit more frustrating when you like are in the field and you know what to do.
Totally.
But it's like ADHD is not a skill deficit. It's a performance.
Right.
You know, it's doing what you know.
The how and not just the what. Right. Totally.
So why was it that you, I mean, besides that you're a PhD student with ADHD, which, man, that's amazing. Why did you want to join?
I had several random people that I had met through various sources, friends and such, that had taken the course and had said really great things. I think one of the major things they emphasized was like, you sort of have to be in a place where you're ready to get into this and work on addressing the hard stuff as it relates, not necessarily, it wasn't like it's like you're motivated enough to want change and then you can take the step. And it's not a cure-all, but you'll
still have ADHD at the end.
Yeah. But you now have skills and you have a support system that will sort of help along the way, you know, someone to powwow for ideas.
Were there things that were surprising to you about being in the group?
Just how many people struggle with this sort of thing, and how similar a lot of the struggles are. It wasn't surprising, but I think being in it is very different.
They move from that sort of intellectual knowledge to that emotional connection.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of, I think this is one reason why researchers should go into the environments in which they hope to sometime, someday make an impact, because it gives reality to it and it shows you the real challenge, like the real world outside of the lab controlled setting challenges that people face. So it was insightful for my own work, but it was also insightful for myself.
So you're a PhD student, you're working?
Yeah. So my work is research.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
How was it for you making time for the group? Because it's a big time commitment.
Yeah, it was difficult, but I think being upfront about that with supervisors and just saying, you know, I'm going to have to take 3 days a week, you know, 2 hours or an hour 15, however long, to do this, and finding space was a little challenging sometimes. Yeah. Like, I know for a while I was in a room that had automatic lights.
So in case you jump out of your chair and start waving your hands.
Start waving.
You're not the only one that has got to do that.
Yeah. So I don't know. So the way the room was designed was just so poor. Like the sensor was covered. So but it wasn't hard if you sort of come to your supervisors with that ahead of time and ask if that's okay. Not everywhere is as flexible.
Did you feel nervous doing that?
A little bit. I think not everyone understands why you need practice with time management. That was sort of like something I had to explain.
Yeah.
To one of my supervisors.
How did you explain that?
I said, you know, sometimes these things come easy for some people. But for others, it needs a little bit more practice. And I'm one of those others. And I think this is going to help me actually achieve the goals that I want to achieve. It's not going to be a cure-all, but it's going to help. And I think also ensuring that, it wouldn't interfere with my work in other ways. So having, I'm going to stay an extra couple hours on these days, or, I'll make sure to set these sort of check-ins with you to make sure that we're still on track. Also reassures them that you're not just like being selfish and which it's okay to be selfish, but that's not going to impact your larger work. So I appreciated that.
So were you nervous having that conversation though?
Yeah, for sure. There's always, I'm nervous about this whole thing going on air, and like, I was telling her, it's like coming out to the world. It's like a very weird phenomenon. But once it's out on the internet, it's there forever.
It's there forever. What were some of your takeaways, or the things that, the areas where you feel you really did grow around?
I think the group really encouraged me to take a look closer at my values. Like, what are the things that are important to me? Why is it that I feel resistance towards some things more than others? And I think, and resistance, like in a motivation sense, like, why is it so hard to do some things?
Right, like, like there's this part of you that wants to do it, and yet it's like there's this invisible like shield that's preventing you from moving forward.
Right, and I know that's something that in the clinic you ask patients all the time. It's like, so what's getting in the way of X, Y, and Z? But asking that question from yourself is just, it's so different.
Oh yeah.
Because then you're like, I don't know. All your defenses are up, It's like, I don't want to fail. I don't want to seem like I'm making excuses. I don't, so, but all of those thoughts are part of what creates so much resistance. And sometimes just accepting that things are hard, or that things won't be perfect, or that things, and that you will fail, and that you will be rejected. And your papers, oh God, guys in academia, if like rejection, just got to deal with it. It's got to sit with it. It's going to hurt. And then you just got to let it go. Be like, okay, what's next on my plate? Where else can I send this paper? It's an important skill. It's very difficult. And this was sort of a discussion that was just recently had. You never sort of develop, it can become easier, but you're never numb to it.
Right. Right.
And you just find better ways to deal with it. Yeah. How's
your sleep? Isn't that something you were working on, during group?
Yeah. Questionable at best.
Okay.
But getting better. I think some of the challenges are, I currently live in like a basement level, apartment. So I don't get a whole lot of light in the morning.
It's hard.
Yeah. And my windows at work don't exist.
Oh no. So you're not getting enough natural light.
Right. So I think I've developed like cave, habits. Cave sleeping patterns, and just like staying and working and looking at a screen all day, So I got blue light filtering glasses, which like computer glasses, which have been helping for sure. And I think I'm going to start using one of those alarm clocks that has like the sunrise, like the
Everyone who I've ever heard that has used them loves them.
Yeah, but it's such an investment, man.
They're
Grad student budget. Come on.
Yeah, they're like $100-something, aren't they? I mean,
yeah, somebody save the grad students. This is totally a cry for help. Like, we need more money. We need better health care. Many things.
Oh man, you're roughing it over there.
Seriously, unionize, do whatever.
And you've stayed engaged in our alumni community.
Yeah, I have. I haven't been as engaged as I've wanted to be, but I figure I'm not in an expensive gym membership, so I can sort of like, that's how I rationalize it to myself. It's like I have a cheaper gym membership, but I also have this community that I can go to and listen to. I listen to the planning meetings. it's just that like prodding that you need that like you won't get in a normal setting. You know, you have normal work deadlines and things, that stuff, that prodding exists, but this is like prodding to make sure that stuff happens, you know? So,
like what were some of the things that, in the alumni sessions that you've been to, that you found helpful?
Right now, I think we're working on the yearly planning, and that's definitely, this is going to be the first time I'm going to plan a year in advance for anything, guys, anything ever.
How's that feel?
Feels interesting. Not quite as like sweaty, you know, you're not quite like left to the deadline. But yeah, it's less anxiety inducing in some ways, and I think more anxiety inducing in others, because you're like, I can't think that far ahead. How do I think that far ahead? But it's good practice. So I'm looking forward to that. We're working through the steps.
We're probably in total spending about 6 weeks really doing like planting all these seeds for planning your year. Cause it's, I know there's been times where, cause I know that when I do my yearly planning, like the ideal is I can spend a full day just fully working on it. But there's been, you know, I know like last year that didn't happen, and it sort of unfolded over the course of several weeks. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of took that, what didn't mean to happen, but just happened that way.
Yeah.
And decided to sort of bring that approach to the alumni of.
Kind of love that.
Yeah. Cause it's like, then your brain can be thinking about it week after week. And now, and then when we have that session that we're doing, in mid-December, which may or may not be out by then. But it's like podcast time. It's just so, it still hurts my brain. Like it's not, cause to come in for 2 hours, we're doing that special, yearly planning session for 2 hours. And if you haven't thought about it at all, it's, you know, it's like the staring at that blank piece of paper, and it's just like, what do I want to do when I grow up? Right.
Right. Firefighter. No, totally. I actually was noticing this. I was like, this is actually really great modeling, because it's the fact that we've broken it up into these different sessions where you're like, oh, pick one domain and just think about what you might want to change or do and achieve in this domain. And now you have a piece of paper that if a random idea does come to you on a day that you're not working on this, you can just jot it down on that paper. And you've already started. And I think that's the part that makes it less anxiety inducing, is that it's broken up into smaller parts. The hardest thing in everything I do is always like when you have the big thing, it's like a monster. Mm-hmm. And all you want to do, it's like so much easier to deal with a bunch of little baby monsters, you know, than like a giant dragon.
You know, Marsha, I don't think I realized how good you are at turning a phrase. I like it.
Thanks.
Yeah, you know, it's, and so much of, you know, when I was just at the ADHD conference, and just and community is just something that is, I mean, we're both kind of science oriented people, but it's like magical, you know.
Totally.
It's you can't, I mean, yes, you could measure it, but you can't really measure it, right? Because it's such it's this feeling that it's hard to describe and hard to really get until you've experienced it.
Yeah, it's a sense of belonging, and it's important. It doesn't matter where it is. It's like you're an artist, your artist community. If you're, you know, somebody who just gets like a little bit of how you think. I think it's beautiful that we have so many different kinds of people in ADHD Rewired. There's just like some similarities that we all sort of share. But I think, yeah, it is. Sense of community is really nice.
So what else? What else would you like to share with listeners, either about your own personal journey, about being part of the group, any random jokes? I
don't. Jokes sort of just have to happen.
It's hard to be put on the spot. They just,
like no joke planning session. Right. Maybe for comedians. I don't know. You guys should interview with Eric if you plan out your jokes, because that'd be a cool topic.
I would imagine professional comedians do
plan. Yes, yeah, they definitely do.
Isn't that like the Jerry Seinfeld thing where like he tries to have these like streaks where he works on writing jokes like every day?
Wow, gosh, sounds like a lot. But no, I guess my only last thing, not even really personal, but just encouraging people to find where they're comfortable in whatever setting they want to be in. There will always be sort of like, you're always going to be pushing against some tide. But that tide, leads to like calmer rivers. And there are other places within that setting that you can be that feels better to you and that feels more comfortable to you. And I think a lot of us in this community and in the scientific community for me, and have resilience as a big part of who we are. That is a strength, right? Like when you're on an interview, when you're talking to people, resilience is a huge, huge factor, and it instills a lot of hope, I think. And community can help with that. It can add to your resilience when you're like not really feeling your most resilient. And I think it helps when you do get rejected and when things don't end up the way you imagine them to end up.
Because there's a lot of uncertainty in life.
There is a lot of uncertainty in life because research is me-search.
Well, Mirage, I think that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for making the trip out here and spending some time with me here in Glenview. It's always fun to have visitors because I get I see so many people on my computer screen every day and every week, and it's just nice to have them be more than 2 inches big.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Eric. His office is super cute, guys. If anyone is ever wanting to just you should come down.
It's cute, huh?
It is. It's cute. I like that, wardrobe. Is that what you call it?
It's a farmhouse bookshelf with sliding doors. I mean, it's when I found that piece of I hate shopping of all kinds, even stuff that I like to get. And when I had to furnish my office, I saw this thing. I fell in love with this piece of furniture.
Nice.
And
this is the soft, squishy side.
And of course, so it's got like a gazillion parts put together. So I found this company. Brilliant name of this business. It's Put My Stupid Thing Together. That's the name of this guy's business.
It's amazing.
It's awesome. And I should have measured it though, because in order for me to get this thing out of this office, I'm going to need to disassemble the entire thing. Because
so can you find the company that's like, take this stupid thing apart? Yeah.
Where the measure your stuff. Don't be stupid. I don't know. It's like
no. That's like a self.
Yeah,
that's like a self-bashing thing.
It's like 2 inches too tall, and it's I love it. I love the sort of the rustic look, and it slides. And
agreed. And they're like trees in the waiting area. They're like decals, but they're really cute.
That's my colleague. We painted this whole space when we for this area. The rent that we pay here is just dirt cheap.
That's amazing.
When we got the space, each office in here was just disgusting. They were cobweb. We painted everything. I mean, it was gross.
It's because of all the squirrels in the neighborhood.
I think this side of this building was just unused for 2 decades. I don't know. God. So yeah.
Cool.
So it's nice. It's cute. Mirage,
it is cute. And y'all should come down. Y'all, this is from spending time in
Appalachia.
in Southwest Virginia, which is great. It's a beautiful area. Hikers, y'all should go. Sure.
Well, I'm glad y'all listened this whole time, and we'll cue that outro music right about now. This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find summaries and additional resources for each episode. You can apply to our free and secret Facebook community. You can learn more about ADHD Rewired's intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups, and sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content you won't get anywhere else. It's all at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click the Patreon button. If you're a regular listener and you're still listening to my voice, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron through our Patreon page. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to listeners, but it is not free to produce. And patrons get really cool perks. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHDrewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. You can also subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube. And you can subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube and see select interviews and some other videos I've posted. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends and your family and your clients, as well as your coaches, therapists, and doctors. And if you're a coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader, and you would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at my website, ADHDrewired.com. And if you're a member of CHAD or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this podcast. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. You know, you might be the person that turns somebody on to a podcast for the very first time. And if you really love this episode, please consider hitting share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I count on you to help me spread the message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and to help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or any other podcast app that accepts ratings and reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe on this podcast on your podcast app so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired. Not sure where to start? In no particular order. Check out Atomic Habits by James Clear, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, 10% Happier, and Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. These are both by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions and Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vaden. The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. Do you have trouble asking for help? Listen to The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. It's one of the best produced audiobooks I've ever heard. If you're looking for something a little bit more, say, magical, I unexpectedly fell in love with the Harry Potter series. And I don't usually listen to those kinds of books, and I loved it. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brené Brown bus yet, check out Brené Brown's books, starting with The Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, The Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader in any capacity, check out her 2018 book, Dare to Lead. And Brené still is my most wanted guest, so if you know Brené, and you would be so kind to make that connection for me, I would be really, really grateful. You know who else I would like to have on the show? You. Click the podcast tab at ADHDrewired.com and then click the Be a Guest button at the top of that page and schedule a 15-minute pre-interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, keep growing, and keep connecting. Self-care is not selfish, and no matter what gets done or doesn't get done, at the end of the day, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.